My family moved when I was in high school because of my father's job. I didn't want to leave my friends or my old school, but in our house, family always comes first. My little sister Polly was only in the 3rd grade at the time. The new house was different from our old one. It wasn't in a busy neighborhood. Instead, it was isolated and very quiet. Most people would call it peaceful, but Polly and I hated the silence. It felt heavy, like the woods surrounding the property were constantly watching us. The night everything changed was a Sunday. We were supposed to go to the movies as a family, but my mom suddenly became very ill. She looked pale and could barely stand. My dad decided he needed to take her to the hospital immediately. "Stay inside," my dad told us. "Lock the doors. We will be back as soon as we can." He sounded worried. Polly and I stood by the window and watched their car taillights disappear down the long, dark driveway. We were alone. About 30 minutes after they left, I was sitting in the living room when I heard the front door creak. I looked up and saw Polly standing there. She was reaching for the handle of the gate outside. "Polly, what are you doing?" I asked, my heart jumping. I didn't hear a knock. I didn't hear a car. She looked back at me, her eyes wide. "Mom is back," she whispered. I saw her. She was standing by the window calling for me to let her in. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew that was impossible. I grabbed my phone and tried to call my parents, but there was no signal. We were completely out of network. I told Polly to stay put. I decided to check the perimeter of the house, thinking maybe they had a car problem, and walked back. I went to the backyard, my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The air was cold, and the trees in the jungle-like woods behind our house seemed to lean closer. I walked around the entire yard, but there was no one there. No car, no parents, no sound. As I turned to go back inside, I stopped dead in my tracks. Through the thin walls of the house, I heard it. It was a soft, melodic sound. It was my mother's voice. She was singing a lullaby, the same one she always sang to Polly when she was scared. The sound was coming directly from Polly's bedroom upstairs. Relief flooded over me for a split second. I thought they must have come back while I was in the backyard. I must have missed the car. I hurried back through the kitchen and toward the front of the house. But as I passed the driveway window, I looked out. The driveway was empty. There was no car. There were no tracks in the gravel. My blood went cold. If the car wasn't there, who was singing in my sister's room? Before I could even process the thought, a piercing scream shattered the silence. It was Polly. It wasn't a normal cry. It was a sound of pure, absolute terror. I sprinted up the stairs, my lungs burning. I threw open her bedroom door. The room was freezing cold. Polly was on the floor, huddled in the corner. She was shivering so violently that her teeth were chattering, and tears were streaming down her face. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the window that faced the woods. "Polly! What happened? Where is Mom?" I yelled, grabbing her shoulders. She tried to open her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her eyes were fixed on the dark tree line outside. She looked like she had seen something that the human mind isn't meant to see. My parents finally came home an hour later. My mom was feeling better. The doctor said it was just a severe reaction to something she ate. But when they walked into the house, they found a different family than the one they had left. They found me holding Polly on the floor. She hasn't spoken a single word since that night. The doctors call it a psychological shock, but it became worse. Within weeks, Polly became paralyzed. She sits in her chair, unable to move her legs, staring out the window. She doesn't watch TV. She doesn't play with her toys. She only points. Every evening when the sun begins to set, she raises a trembling hand and points toward the deep, dark jungle behind our house. Her face twists into an expression of intense fear. It is as if she can see someone or something standing among the trees waiting for the rest of us. We moved away from that house shortly after, but it didn't matter. Whatever Polly saw that night followed her in her mind. I still lie awake at night wondering about the voice I heard. It sounded exactly like my mother, but my mother was miles away in a hospital bed. I don't go near the woods anymore, because I know that sometimes silence isn't just the absence of noise. Sometimes it's a warning. Moving to a new house is supposed to be a fresh start. For my family, my husband, our 6-year-old daughter, and myself, it was a financial necessity. The city had become far too expensive, and we found a spacious house in a quiet neighborhood for a price that seemed too good to be true. We should have known that when a price is that low, there is usually a reason. The previous tenants were a Mexican family. When we first stepped across the threshold, the air didn't feel right. It felt heavy, almost like the oxygen had been replaced by something thick and cold. As we walked through the rooms, we noticed the walls. They weren't decorated with family photos or floral wallpaper. Instead, they were covered in bizarre, disturbing paintings. They looked demonic, dark figures with twisted limbs and empty eyes. The previous family had left in a hurry. They left behind a lot of their belongings, which we found strange. We tried to call the phone numbers they left on the lease agreement to ask them to come pick up their things, but the calls never went through. The phones wouldn't even ring. It was just dead silence on the other end. Not wanting to live among their junk, my husband and I decided to move everything they left behind into the basement. Most of it was standard furniture, but there were boxes filled with items that made my skin crawl. There were dozens of candles, many of them half-burnt, and piles of old, handmade dolls. This was particularly confusing because, as far as we knew from the landlord, the previous family didn't have any children living with them. My daughter saw one of the dolls, a pale thing with matted hair, and asked if she could keep it. I felt an immediate wave of revulsion and told her no. Everything went into the basement, and I locked the door, placing the key high on top of a tall wardrobe where she couldn't possibly reach it. A week passed. My husband had to go out of town for work, leaving me alone with our daughter. That night, she was sleeping in my bed because she was scared of the new house. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound coming from beneath the floorboards. It was the sound of a child giggling. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a soft, melodic tittering coming directly from the basement. My heart stopped. I looked down at my side, half expecting my daughter to be gone, but she was fast asleep right next to me. I grabbed my phone and called my husband, my voice shaking as I told him someone was in the house. He sighed, told me I was just stressed from the move, and urged me to go back to sleep. He said I was overthinking things. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, as soon as the sun came up, I grabbed the key from the top of the wardrobe. I went to the basement door and unlocked it. The air that hit me was freezing and smelled of damp earth. The basement was covered in a thick layer of dust and dirt, which was strange because we had just cleaned it a week prior. I looked down at the floor. My blood turned to ice. There, clearly pressed into the dirt, were the footprints of a small child. They started near the boxes of dolls and led toward the center of the room. I ran upstairs, grabbed my daughter, and sat her down. I asked her if she had somehow found the key and gone into the basement. She looked at me with wide, honest eyes and said, "No, Mommy. I'm scared of the basement." I knew she was telling the truth. She's only 6. She couldn't reach the top of that wardrobe even with a chair. When my husband got home later that day, I dragged him to the basement to show him the proof. But when we opened the door and I pointed to the floor, the footprints were gone. The dust was undisturbed. He looked at me with pity, clearly thinking I was losing my mind. Driven by a need for answers, I went outside and found an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. I introduced myself and asked if she knew anything about the family who lived there before us. When I told her they had moved out, she let out a massive sigh of relief. "I'm so glad they're gone," she whispered, looking at the house with genuine fear. "I should have warned you, but I didn't realize they had actually left." What she told me next made me feel like I was physically sinking into the ground. She told me that the Mexican family did have a daughter. 6 years ago, she was found dead in that basement, hanging from one of the rafters. No one knew why she did it, and the tragedy broke the parents. But they didn't just mourn. The neighbor told me that for the last 6 years, the family had been practicing black magic. They weren't trying to move on. They were trying to bring her back. The paintings, the candles, the dolls. It was all part of a ritual to open a door for their daughter to return. I didn't need to hear anything else. I went back to the house and did some digging of my own. I found old news reports and police records that confirmed everything the neighbor said. The death, the dates, the names. It was all true. We didn't even pack everything. We grabbed our essentials, loaded the car, and left that house as fast as we could. We didn't care about the deposit or the lease, because as we were pulling out of the driveway, I looked up at the basement window, which sat just above the ground level. There, pressed against the glass, was the pale, dirty face of a small girl. She wasn't laughing anymore. 5 months ago, my life felt like it was finally falling into place. I had just married the woman of my dreams, and we were expecting our first child. It was supposed to be the happiest time of our lives, but we faced a practical problem. Our apartment was on the 6th floor of an old building that didn't have an elevator. My wife was early in her pregnancy, but I knew that within a few months, climbing those 6 flights of stairs would become an impossible task for her. We both had some savings tucked away, so we made a mutual decision. It was time to find a real home. We spent weeks scouring the internet until we found a listing that seemed too good to be true. It was a beautiful house located in a quiet, isolated colony. The price was surprisingly low, and the photos showed a peaceful environment surrounded by nature. It felt like the perfect place to raise a child, quiet, lonely, and far away from the chaos of the city. We signed the papers and moved in as quickly as we could. The first day was exhausting. We spent hours moving boxes and arranging furniture. While I was hauling a rug from the car, a neighbor approached me. He didn't offer a warm welcome or a handshake. Instead, his first question was blunt. "Do you have a dog?" I told him no, explaining that my wife has a severe allergy to dogs. His face darkened, and he looked at me with a strange intensity. "You need to get one," he said, "as soon as possible." Before I could ask him why, he turned around and walked back to his house. As I looked around the neighborhood, I realized he wasn't the only one. Every single house in that colony had a dog. But they weren't the kind of friendly pets you usually see in suburban areas. These were massive, aggressive animals, guard dogs that looked like they were trained to attack. I remember thinking how foolish these people were. Why would you want a violent beast in your yard when you could have a small, cute pet? I dismissed it as a local quirk and went back inside. By the time the sun went down, we were finished with the essential unpacking. My wife was drained from the move. She took her prenatal vitamins and fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. I, however, was restless. The silence of the new house felt heavy, and my mind was racing with thoughts about our future. I felt the urge to smoke, but I never did it around my wife, especially now that she was pregnant. I decided to step out into the backyard to clear my head. As I walked through the dark living room toward the back door, the silence was shattered. Every dog in the neighborhood began to bark simultaneously. It wasn't the usual barking at a passing car. It sounded like they had seen something terrifying, something that shouldn't be there. I paused for a second, feeling a chill run down my spine, but I told myself it was just the wind or a stray cat. I stepped out into the cool night air and lit my cigarette. I was standing there, trying to relax, when I heard a faint sound coming from the edge of the property. It was the sound of a woman crying. I followed the sound toward the back fence and saw a figure huddled in the shadows. It was a woman, but there was something deeply unsettling about her appearance. She looked disheveled and frantic. When she saw me, she didn't stop crying. She looked up with wide, watery eyes and asked, "Have you seen my dog?" I felt a wave of pity for her. "No," I said gently. "We just moved in today, but I heard a lot of barking coming from the other side of the colony. Maybe he wandered over there." I started to feel uncomfortable. The way she was staring at me felt predatory. I told her I needed to go back inside because my wife was alone, and I didn't want to leave her for too long. The woman's demeanor changed instantly. "Don't be in such a hurry," she said, her voice dropping to a low, soothing tone. "This is a good place. You should stay out here. Please, feel secure in this place." I shook my head, backed away, and mentioned again that my wife was pregnant and needed me. I told her good night and turned to walk toward the house. Suddenly, I felt a cold, tight grip on my wrist. The woman had lunged forward and grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "I am telling you not to go," she hissed. Her face was contorted with anger, and her eyes were filled with a strange, dark energy. Extreme fear washed over me. I realized in that moment that this wasn't a grieving pet owner. This was a distraction. I wrenched my arm away from her and sprinted toward my back door. My heart was hammering against my ribs. All I could think about was my wife, sleeping helplessly in our bedroom. Had someone gotten inside? I burst through the back door and ran through the house, screaming her name. When I reached our bedroom door and flung it open, my blood turned to ice. A man was standing by the bed. He was wearing a heavy black jacket that seemed too large for his frame. He was holding my wife in his arms, lifting her off the bed like she weighed nothing. She was completely limp, her head hanging back. He was halfway to the window, clearly intending to kidnap her. The moment our eyes met, he froze. Realizing he had been caught, he didn't try to fight. He dropped my wife onto the hard floor and dove headfirst through the window, shattering the glass and disappearing into the darkness of the night. I rushed to my wife's side. She was breathing, but I couldn't wake her up. I called for help and got her to the hospital as fast as I could. When she finally regained consciousness hours later, she had no memory of what happened. The doctors found traces of a sedative spray in her system. The intruder must have sprayed it in the room while she slept, ensuring she wouldn't wake up while he carried her away. I couldn't tell her the truth. I didn't want her to live with that trauma while carrying our child. I made up a story about a gas leak in the new house to explain why we had to leave immediately. We never spent another night in that home. When I went to the police to file a report, the detective's expression told me everything I needed to know. He told me that there had been a string of disappearances in that specific area. There were people, cultists, who were targeting pregnant women for use in black magic rituals. I finally understood why the neighbor told me to get a dog. The dogs weren't pets, they were the only thing keeping the monsters at bay. We thought we had found a peaceful, lonely paradise, but we had actually moved right into the middle of a hunting ground. We lost our savings, but I don't care. We escaped with our lives, and that is the only thing that matters.